I'm Ralph Preston, and tonight William Lowe and I are going to talk about attitude and acceptance. And this is the second time we've done it, so we're calling it part two. So that's our roadmap for tonight. We covered a little bit mostly about attitude and getting motivated and how to make sure that you've got a good attitude so you can concentrate on your recovery. And this week we didn't get to everything, so this week we're going to continue. And William, I know when we were talking, you had some points about the importance of relying on your support network. So usually start us off. So why don't you do that again?
Yeah, sure thing. So when it comes to acceptance and attitude and recovery after stroke, this is something which is near and dear to my heart because when I had my stroke when I was 17 years old, uh, I was at the peak of my of what I thought was my life at the time, and when I had when I had this stroke happen, it was almost like I was being hit by a ton of bricks. Um, and I was really stuck in a place where I was trying to figure out how to get in the right headspace mentally and prepare myself for, what would obviously be a quite the journey, as many of the folks would know watching that stroke recovery is. And one of the first things that I identified that I needed to know, and this was very much so the case for myself because I had my stroke during a time when there wasn't a lot of knowledge related to neuroplasticity, as we know now, and a lot of research into how the brain recovered wasn't there wasn't as much as there is now. So the first thing I identified when I had my stroke was that I don't know how strokes I don't know many people who have recovered from a stroke. Um, how can I understand more about stroke recovery, and what can I do to help educate myself so that when I leave the hospital, I can keep the train of recovery going and I can help myself rather than having to rely on other people. Because as someone who was quite independent before, the last thing I wanted to do was I wanted to depend on someone else to help me in my own recovery, because this was something which I wanted to take personal responsibility for. So the first one of the first things I identified that I had to do in my own recovery when I first started off my journey in the early days was to obviously take advantage of my support network. And what this basically meant was asking the people who treated me, for example, my physical therapists, my doctors, and my neurologists, why they thought the way that they did, and why they were providing the exercises to me, which they were providing. And the reason why I did this was because I wanted to understand how the brain actually responded to exercise and why it is that certain exercises worked to help your brain connect the dots or recover what was lost, and what the and whether or not there was a bigger system to this whole recovery after stroke or neuroplasticity. In other words, I became a bit of a scientist trying to figure out how neuroplasticity worked, just through a big process of trial and error, um, and this involved asking my therapist for advice, applying the advice, and then coming back with them with the footage of myself applying the advice and asking for their feedback and asking them questions on why it is that whatever I did worked from a neuroscience perspective, and why it is that I was able to see neuroplasticity happen. And I think this is really important because often as stroke survivors, and this this has been the case in what I've been told from other stroke survivors, is that uh, when they've gone to see their physical therapist, in more cases than not, there hasn't been as much focus on the education side of things or theory side of things from their physical therapist. In other words, their physical therapist won't necessarily always explain to them why they're suggesting the exercises to them for their specifics for their specific stage of recovery and how that exercise is going to help them. And so because of this, what I found is that a lot of stroke survivors, they don't know why they're doing what they're doing and how it's actually going to help them in their recovery. So for me, because I'm someone who wants to figure out how things worked, I found that this was really beneficial for myself because I knew that there was a time when therapy would end and I would have to think for myself and I guess provide therapy for myself so that I could continue to drive my recovery because I mean the average hospital stay is what, a month or 2 months, at least here in Australia. And then after that, then you're discharged and you're pretty much on your own. So that's one of the major things which was extremely relevant to me in my own recovery in terms of, I guess, acceptance and attitude. It was just something I did which got me in the right headspace and it gave me a lot more control over my life because I knew what to expect in recovery after stroke, and obviously asking questions from the health professionals such as my physical therapists and doctors. Their education gave me a sense that I knew what I needed to do in order to move the needle forward in my recovery, and what sort of things I should be looking out for when it came to exercises which actually would help me in my own recovery as well. So that's the first point. And the second point, and the second thing which was really, really important when it came to my recovery in terms of, I guess, having I guess developed the attitude which I have towards recovery is this idea that when it comes to recovery after stroke, not to expect changes immediately on a day-to-day basis, but rather expect changes to occur or improvements to occur on a monthly or weekly basis. And the reason why I say this is because it's very rare that you're going to see improvements on a day-to-day basis unless you've just done an exercise which is completely different to the brain, or unless you're in the very first month or of your recovery after stroke, where neuroplasticity and your ability to see changes are at its highest. So that's why I say it's best to review changes monthly and weekly, because if you do what I did, which is I was a huge advocate of footage and film. What I would usually do before I did an exercise is I would film myself walking the way I did. Let's say if it was a walking exercise, and then I would revisit that footage at maybe a month later to compare how I was walking a month after I'd performed that exercise versus how I was walking before the exercise. And if I noticed that I was walking a lot better, if my gait was a lot better, or maybe if I was walking in more of a rhythm, then I knew that exercise was actually bringing me improvements. And by doing this over and over again, for every exercise I did, it helped me to uncover, I guess, the winning formula which worked for my brain, because every stroke is different. Everyone's experience of stroke recovery is different, and how your brain is going to be to respond to exercise is going to be very different. For example, and I believe Ralph and we talked about this a long time ago, you might find that maybe your brain learns most by just jumping into the exercise and just doing it, or maybe your brain learns best if it gets some sort of if it has something to latch onto. For example, it might learn best from something like electrical stimulation, where you're getting a prompt from a machine to tell your brain what to do. So by reviewing things on a month-to-month basis and a weekly basis, and also taking footage of myself performing exercises and reviewing this footage, that gave me an understanding of what worked and what didn't, and led me a little bit closer to, I guess, the winning formula of what exercises would help me recover the most in my own journey and recovery after stroke. And I think this is really important because at the end of the day, the reason why you go to your therapist or your physical therapist is because you want to find an exercise which is going to move the needle forward. And quite often, the winning formula in recovery after stroke, at least from what I've learned, is that is an exercise which can allow you to not only improve in your recovery, but can also be continuously modified or changed with respect to your progress, so that you can keep applying that exercise in such a way that you're able to build that blueprint in your brain of what it's like to actually perform that movement, and you can become a lot better at that movement over time. So I mean, for example, a useful metaphor for this could be something like training for the Olympics, which is something I like to think of recovery after stroke. In that, if you're learning to walk, in your recovery after stroke, you're not going to get very far by practicing walking around your house, but rather if you practice your walking outside on hills and on different terrains, you're more likely to improve because you're exposing your brain to different environments, and also you're allowing your brain to connect the dots a lot better because you're giving your brain that sense of challenge, and you're also giving your brain that sense of novelty, which is something which the research has been shown, which has shown that the brain responds to in recovery after stroke. So those are just basically some of the points which were really important to me when it came to, I guess, developing the attitude which I have towards recovery after stroke. And I think that both of these points are really important because not only can they help you stay motivated in recovery after stroke, but they can also help you reach that state of acceptance a lot quicker, which is a place I highly recommend that you get to as soon as possible, because once you reach acceptance, it's going to be a lot easier to take control of your life after you've had a stroke. So I've been talking for a while, and I think I'll just pass it back to you, Ralph. Earlier, we had a discussion about some of these points, which I talked about. Perhaps you could share some of your thoughts with the folks watching.
Sure. I agree with that last statement, of course, about the sooner you can get to acceptance, the better for your recovery. And that's kind of what we talked about in the first one of these. And so I was going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I did and some of the things that other people did, some of the things that I learned about in order to keep on track. You know, once you get to acceptance and you get on track, you know, the road's not always smooth, and rather than get off track or get stuck mentally and have to get unstuck, or get depressed and have to get undepressed, if you can, and it's not always possible every single day, you know, it's best to see if you can't keep on track. So some of the things that I wrote down were, you're talking about measuring. I think it's important to not have unrealistic goals, because they're you don't tend to achieve them. I tended to measure my progress and just accept whatever gains I was making, not say I'm going to be able to do this by that. And because I thought, for me anyway, that's kind of self-defeating if I don't make the goal. So so that was one thing that I did. Let's see, what else? Oh, you're talking about support community. Well, let's talk a little bit about community in general. When they released you from the hospital, when they released me from the hospital anyway, they gave me like 5 things, like eating better, eating right, exercise, maybe sleep. About 4 of them were physical, and the last one was that we're social creatures, and it's important that we engage. And so if you're gonna, so it's important to engage. It's important to not sit at home, because when you sit alone, it's easier to do that woe is me stuff. So one way I try, and well, I'm mobile. I understand some people aren't as mobile as me, but it's important to build community. And if you're going to surround yourself with people, surround yourself with positive people. A lot of times after stroke, some of the people that weren't so positive often disappear. So those are a couple things. Let's see what else. I found it important to believe. Power of positive thinking. A book was written about it. By believe, I mean believe in yourself. Believe that you can do it. One way that people do this is it's kind of like an extension of mental imagery, which is when you imagine that you can move something and you move it maybe with the other hand, and eventually you move it. You can apply those same kind of belief techniques into visualizing your future, and whatever you try and visualize, you can keep that as a goal and try and make it happen. So let's see what else I wrote down. Oh yeah, when things are working well and you're feeling good, take advantage of those times, because you tend to be more successful and feel good about your recovery and yourself. So when you're feeling good, relish in it a bit. Let's see, I'm gonna run out of stuff here soon. What do you do to get back on track, or stay on track? One of the things that I have always done is I'm a photographer, so I find nature very soothing. I find beauty it's very soothing, and so sometimes if you immerse yourself in nature and beauty, it's hard to, with all the beauty that's around us, it's harder to feel as isolated and like your whole world was turned upside down. And William, I know it must really suck to have a stroke at 17, but I'll tell you, no matter what age you are, you kind of feel like your whole world got turned upside down. Just some of us who had strokes later got to live more of life without having had the stroke. Anyway, so those were some of my points. I'm sure as we keep talking, I can think of some others. So I'll toss it back to you. Maybe some of the things I said made you think of some other points on this subject.
Yeah, sure. So one thing I really agree with you, Ralph, is when you said that, when you mentioned that point about when things are working well, and that it's important to relish those moments, or cherish those moments. And I really agree with this, because I think sometimes in recovery after stroke, and this is something which I found in some of my clients recently, is that sometimes the way you do something in recovery after stroke, or sometimes the way that your brain has learnt how to do something in recovery after stroke, it could be different to how you did it before your stroke. So, for example, for some stroke survivors, they might find that when they send a signal from their brain to their ring finger, that they can open up their hand a lot better, compared to if they were to trying to send a signal from their brain to try and open their hand normally. And the reason why I think this is important is because it all comes back down to that idea of finding the winning formula in that, and also flickers of movement. In that, one of the things I noticed in my own recovery is that whenever my brain learns something new, I would have to try to teach my brain how to send that signal to a certain muscle in a way which it had almost never done before. And because it was so new, I would have to keep reminding my brain how to send that signal to that muscle to turn it on, so until it became something which was just second nature. And I think in recovery after stroke, sometimes when you get back a movement or when you get back something which you weren't able to do before, in those early stages, it can be very exciting when you're getting back that movement and you're able to perform that movement. But I think it's important to be really observant and really cherish these moments, because once you cherish these moments, and if you're really observant, then you could potentially have the opportunity to turn a really small movement into something which is functional and something which can improve your quality of life. And I know for yourself, Ralph, you shared that story with me a while back, how when you were learning to open up your fingers, you noticed that one day you were able to move your fingers about an eighth of an inch forward, and then you kept working at it until it became second nature. Now you're able to open up your fingers. So that's just something I think which is really important to attitude and acceptance, in that it comes back to that idea that you're not going to see. I mean, it more so comes back to that idea of, jumping on recovery, and making sure that you review your progress. I guess like a maniac. Maybe monthly and weekly if you're really discouraged, but on a day-to-day basis, if you're really looking to take on a granular approach to your recovery and you're looking to capitalize on every small improvement possible, I think that in recovery after stroke, if you want to make something happen, it's important to keep an eye out for those really small movements and those really small changes in how you might send a signal from your brain to do something which you did before your stroke, after your stroke, so that you can, I guess, educate your brain on how to do something a lot better and translate what might be seen as a really small improvement into something which can become functional and improve your quality of life, just like what Ralph did when he discovered that he had an eighth of a movement opening his fingers, and he was able to turn that into a bigger movement. So, I mean, aside from that, I also think that it's also important to keep an open mind to new ideas that have been proven to work. Because I know for sure, before I came on Facebook and I discovered all these Facebook groups in stroke recovery, that I thought I knew a lot about recovery after stroke. And after I saw these ideas, which were tried and tested by other survivors around the world, that gave me other ideas on things which could also work in recovery after stroke. I know for Ralph and I, when we both had our stroke, there were probably no such things as Facebook groups online where you could exchange ideas with other stroke survivors around the world. I know for myself, when I had my stroke, like I had already mentioned, there weren't a lot of stroke survivors who had recovered from a stroke. There weren't a lot of people to ask questions. There were really only the therapists and the doctors, and that knowledge was very limited. It wasn't tried and true advice, but rather it was things which were shown to theoretically work. And most of the time, a lot of these treatments, they came from the textbooks, and the textbooks could only bring you so far. Whereas I think if you keep an open mind to new ideas, especially ones online where you see other stroke survivors have tested them themselves, then it can really do a lot for your recovery, because you can try them out yourself, and you can at least test them out for a week, test them out for a month to see if that particular exercise is a good fit for your recovery, or if it could be the exercise which could take you to the next level of your recovery after stroke. So that's pretty much everything I have to add. And I'm curious, Ralph, did you have anything else to add to those points I just shared?
Yeah, I thought of one or two, and I looked over my notes, and I had one or two we didn't get to. Let's see if I can put them in some kind of order or make sense out of them. One thing is that, um, it's kind of a one step at a time process. So you have to realize that. So patience is a good thing to have. And we're kind of back to the old, I guess, the overused but appropriate. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So patience will serve you well. And of course, I think we've talked about this tonight and other times. I think, you know, um, in what you were talking about, the more success you have in your recovery, then the more likely you are to have patience and tolerance with yourself, especially if it's measurable in some way. Um, let's see. Oh, yes. When you were talking about taking advantage of the moment, I was also talking not only relishing it, but like if your body's working good, keep going. Because then all of a sudden, I did that sometimes. I'd feel good and I'd just keep going, and next thing I knew, I was doing more of something or walking farther or whatever. So whenever you feel good, definitely relish in it. But also, it might be a time where you could see if you can't do better, so you have even more to relish in. I kind of do this in my head, but some people have like a gratitude journal. Two types I've heard. Well, the type I did was I kept my progress in my head. Some people who don't always wake up ready to go, some help find it helpful to sometimes write down a few things that they're grateful for. I know in the rehab hospital, I had a picture of my granddaughter and a saying I like about attitude. And when things got tough, I'd reach around to that wheelchair pocket and pull it out and look at my granddaughter. And, that was a gratitude thing. Think about family, think about the fact you're still alive, think about the fact you woke up. Um, so let's see. We already covered like try to have a make it happen attitude. So that was pretty much it from me. So unless you got something else, I guess we'll close this out and see everybody next time.
Yeah, I mean, I just had one thing,
Sure.
Ralph. And this is more of an add-on to your idea of relishing the moment. Earlier I mentioned that some stroke survivors, let's say if they're trying to learn to open up their hand, they might find that sending a signal from their brain to the ring finger might actually help them open up a lot better. I notice from what I've noticed from the stroke survivors I've helped that when you find when you find a certain signal from your brain which helps you achieve a movement a lot better, jump on it. Because it's likely that in your recovery after stroke, the way that your brain sends signals to turn on the muscle is going to feel a lot different to before you did it before your stroke. So if you find that sending a signal from your brain to try and lift up your leg, you have to send it in a different way. Let's say you have to send a signal to maybe move your leg a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, and just really concentrate on turning on the stomach muscles at the same time. If it helps you get the job done and it helps you move you closer toward your goal, then go for it. Because maybe that's how your brain has associated the movement. And maybe that's how your brain has connected the dots in your brain in a recovery after stroke. Because in recovery after stroke, and this is another topic for another time, sometimes your brain learns by association, in that when it learns a new movement, it's not going to learn that movement the exact same way it used to before your stroke, but rather it could be using two different brain areas, which are completely different in their roles in order to perform that movement. So you might notice that whenever you strain your face or when you twitch your face, that you can actually open up your hand a lot better. If that's the case, go for it because it helps you get the job done. And as you refine that movement a lot better, perhaps your face won't twitch as much, and your brain can learn to separate the face association with the hand movement. So I think that's just really important when it comes to recovery after stroke. And like I said, you know, when you see that little slither of recovery, jump onto it and really relish the moment. And when things are going good, you want your brain to remember what it's already learned and just keep doing what you're doing. Find that winning formula. And like Ralph said, you know, if you feel good and you feel like you can keep doing it until it becomes second nature, and you won't even have to think about doing it. So that's everything I had to add, and that's just the last point for myself. Is there anything from you, Ralph?
No, just part of that whole process is jumping on it, but also if things are working good and you're feeling good, you just might get more. And if you're going after numbers, then you have a bigger number, and that's always self-affirming. So no, so we'll wrap this one up. I guess we're gonna the next two segments we're gonna do are gonna be on these. This makes 6 of the ones that we did in a survey we took that people wanted, and the next two, the last two, are spasticity help next time, and then we're going to talk about alternative therapies in the one after that. So tune in again. We'll see you next time. To the audience, and William, thank you as always for your time.
No problem. Thanks, Ralph.